The scar had been there so long I'd stopped seeing it. It started at my collarbone and ran in a diagonal slash down to the left side of my sternum. Not a combat wound, not a blade, but a burn. A thermal lance blast from the Keth border skirmish 7 years ago. I'd been a medic attached to the 3rd Frontier Survey Corps, and a Keth energy weapon had clipped me when I was pulling a wounded engineer out of a collapsing relay station. The engineer lived. I kept the scar. Everyone who'd seen it over the years had either looked away quickly or asked about it with the careful curiosity of someone examining a museum piece. My mother had kissed it once when I came home and said nothing. That was the best response I'd ever gotten. I hadn't thought about the scar in years. Not until the night the Vrothai cruiser fell out of the sky over the Dun Basin, and I pulled a woman out of the wreck who looked at me, and went absolutely still and said, in a voice like something cracking open after a long frost, "It can't be you." But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Calder Voss. I was 34 years old, an ex-military field medic turned civilian salvage contractor, working a transit hub near the outer edge of the Corvin Reach. The Dun Basin was a gravel flat at the bottom of a canyon system on a planet called Marin's World, a refueling outpost, a scatter of prefab buildings, and about 400 humans who had no particular ambitions beyond making enough credits to get somewhere better. I was one of them. I'd been there 2 years. I was good at my job. I didn't have much else going for me, and I'd made my peace with that. The Vrothai were not at war with humanity. That was the important thing to understand. They were not our allies either. They occupied that awkward diplomatic middle ground of a species that had encountered us maybe 30 years ago, found us mildly interesting, and had since maintained the galactic equivalent of a polite handshake, formal communications, trade agreements, zero intimacy. They were tall, bilateral, bipedal, with silvery white skin that seemed to refract light at odd angles, 4-fingered hands, eyes that ranged from pale violet to deep amber depending on their status rank, and a cultural formality that made human bureaucrats look like kindergartners at recess. Nobody on Marin's World expected to have much to do with them. The cruiser came down on a Wednesday night local calendar. I heard it before I saw it, a low harmonic groan, like a cathedral bell struck with the wrong mallet, and then a pressure wave that rattled every prefab panel in my quarters and knocked my coffee off the shelf. By the time I got outside, the canyon was lit up orange and gold, and a column of smoke was rising from the gravel flat 3 kilometers east of the settlement. I was the closest thing to a trauma medic the outpost had. I grabbed my kit and ran. The cruiser was about 200 meters long, a mid-sized vessel by Vrothai standards, from what I could tell, and it had come down at a shallow angle that had spared the main hull from complete disintegration. The impact had carved a furrow through the gravel flat, and the forward section had crumpled, but the aft 2/3 were more or less structurally intact. Fires burned at the bow. The ramp on the port side had deployed halfway and jammed, leaving a gap about wide enough to squeeze through sideways. I squeezed through. The interior smelled like ozone and something sweet and chemical I couldn't name, Vrothai life support, probably. Emergency lighting cast everything in a dim amber. The corridor I entered was narrow by human standards, the ceiling maybe 20 centimeters above my head, the walls lined with conduit and panel covers in an iridescent dark material that wasn't quite metal and wasn't quite ceramic. Ahead of me, toward the aft section, I could hear something moving. I moved toward it. The corridor opened into a larger compartment, a crew space of some kind, with low platforms that might have been bunks, overturned equipment, and a scatter of broken glass or crystal. And on the floor, half propped against the far wall, was a Vrothai woman. She was wounded. I could see that immediately, a gash across her left side, deep bleeding in the dark amber that Vrothai blood ran. She'd pressed her hand over it. She was conscious barely, her head tipped back against the wall, her eyes, they were amber, a deep warm amber, almost gold, moving slowly toward me as I came through the doorway. She was wearing armor. Not combat armor exactly, but something formal, layered, ceremonial, the kind of thing you wore if you were somebody. It was mostly black, etched with silver patterns I didn't recognize, and it was damaged now. One plate cracked across her torso, which was how she'd taken the wound. Her hair was white, not pale blonde, not silver, but white, worn in a complex arrangement of braided segments pinned close to her skull on one side and loose on the other, now coming apart. Her face was sharp, precise, the kind of face built to issue commands and be obeyed. She looked at me, and her jaw tightened. "Human," she said. The word came out flat and contained, not hostile but not exactly welcoming either. She said it like a notation. "Medic," I said back and held up my kit. "Can I look at the wound?" The amber eyes moved from my face to the kit and back. "The others," she said. Her voice was low and careful, like someone choosing each word with two hands. "Crew, forward section." "The forward section is destroyed," I said. I kept my voice even. I'd told next of kin bad news enough times to know how to deliver it. "I'm sorry, I haven't found survivors there." Something moved in her face, not grief, exactly, but a kind of consolidation. A door closing. She filed whatever that information meant to her somewhere internal and locked it. "Then I am alone," she said. "For now, I have people coming from the settlement, but I'm here now and that wound needs pressure before anything else." I took a step toward her. "May I?" Another moment of assessment. Then she moved her hand away from her side. I crossed the compartment, knelt beside her and got to work. Field medicine is not glamorous and it is not quiet. It involves a lot of ripping and cutting and pressing and asking questions about pain levels and ignoring the answers when the patient says they're fine and they clearly aren't. The Vrathai woman bore all of it with a stillness that would have read as stoic in a human and read in her as something closer to granite. She answered my functional questions in clipped, precise sentences. "Does this hurt?" "Yes." "Can you take a breath?" "Yes." "Tell me if you feel cold." "I will." She didn't volunteer anything else. I got the wound cleaned and packed and bound with the supplies I had, which weren't ideal for Vrathai physiology, but were better than nothing. Her internal biology was different enough from mine that I was working partly from training and partly from instinct, extrapolating from what I knew about the general architecture of bilateral bipeds. She wasn't going to bleed out. That was the best I could do. When I sat back on my heels to check my work, she was looking at my hands. "You know Vrathai anatomical zones," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "Frontier Survey Corps medic, 7 years, we trained on a lot of species." Her gaze moved up from my hands to my face. "You served on the frontier." "Border skirmish with the Keth mostly. Some survey work, nothing glorious." "The Keth," something shifted in her voice. "The Corvin border action." "That's the one." "I know of it." She paused. "What is your name?" "Calder Vas." She didn't give me hers. Not then. She was looking at my face still, and there was something in her assessment that was more than the clinical look of a patient checking whether their medic seemed competent. Something more searching. "How long until others arrive?" she asked. 20 minutes, maybe 30. She nodded once. Then she closed her eyes and was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that looked like rest but wasn't. I recognized it. Had done it myself in field situations. The kind of internal inventory you take when you're not sure which parts of you are still working right. Then she opened her eyes and said, with a directness that startled me, "I would prefer not to be here when they do." I looked at her. "You need medical attention I can't give you in the field." "I need not to be found here." She held my gaze. "There is a distinction." I sat with that for a moment. "You're not just a crew member," I said. Her chin lifted just slightly. "No." "The armor," I said. "The patterning. I've seen Vrathai rank insignia in intelligence briefings." "Not recently, but—" "Then you understand," she said. That there are people who would prefer to know exactly where I am, and that I would prefer they did not know for a time, until I understand what brought this ship down. You think it wasn't an accident? I know it was not. I thought about it. My settlement was 400 people. When the emergency teams arrived, they'd call it in to the sector authority. The sector authority would call it in to the HFY Diplomatic Corps. The HFY Diplomatic Corps would send people. Those people would be looking for the occupants of this ship. And if she was right, if someone had put this ship down deliberately, the people they sent might not be the people she wanted to find her. I thought about the Corvin border skirmish. I thought about the engineer I'd pulled out of the collapsing relay station, the one who told me afterward, 3 days later, from a hospital bed, that the relay station's failure had not been an accident either, and that he'd been the only person who knew it. He'd been dead inside a week. There's a storage building, I said. East side of the canyon, half a kilometer. We use it for salvage. It's not monitored. I can get you there before my people arrive. She looked at me for a long time. Why? She asked. Because you asked, I said. And because you're hurt and alone and the wrong people finding you here seems like a bad outcome. And because I don't like it when things that aren't accidents get called accidents. Another long look. Calder Voss, she said, as if she was filing the name in the same internal space where she'd filed the news about her crew. That's me. Help me stand, she said. I got her to the storage building. It wasn't elegant, she could walk, but not quickly, and I had one arm around her to take some of her weight, and we moved through the dark canyon by the light of my handheld and the distant glow of the still-burning wreck. She said nothing during the walk. I said nothing. There is a particular companionship in crisis movement, a focus that strips away the social layer and leaves only the immediate, and we had that. The storage building was prefab, unglamorous, half full of salvage parts and equipment I'd been cataloging for the last 6 months. I cleared a space in the back, pulled out a thermal blanket from the emergency supply locker, and arranged something approximating a resting place. She settled into it with a controlled care that told me the wound was hurting more than she was letting on. I sat down across from her and did what any medic does in a watch. I waited. She was quiet for a long time. Outside, I could hear the distant sound of vehicles arriving at the wreck site, voices carrying in the dry canyon air. They won't find much, she said without opening her eyes. The wreck is pretty complete. The navigation core would have burned in the initial impact. The crew manifest is encoded to my command authorization. Without me to confirm it, they'll get nothing from the ship's records. She paused. Which means they'll report an unmanned vessel, or a vessel with an unknown crew manifest. Either way, no one will be looking for me. For a time. How much time do you need? She opened her eyes. The amber in them caught the faint light from my handheld. Enough to send a communication to people I trust, she said. Enough to verify what happened to my ship before those who caused it know I survived. I can get you a comm unit, I said. Untraceable civilian band. I've got one in my quarters. She looked at me again with that particular assessing look. Like she was doing math in her head and not quite believing the answer she kept arriving at. You do this with unusual readiness, she said. Help an alien stranger, hide her from authorities. Offer her your resources. I told you why. You told me reasons, she said. That is not the same as an explanation. I thought about that. Outside, the voices of the recovery team carried faint and far. Someone called out a status report. Someone else answered. I spent 7 years on the frontier, I said, and the thing I learned out there is that the galaxy doesn't sort itself into enemies and allies the way the briefings tell you it does. It sorts itself into people in trouble and people not in trouble, and the people in trouble usually just need someone to stay. She was quiet for a moment. You stayed, she said. That's generally what I do. I brought her food the next morning. Human food, the best I had, which was not saying much. Protein bars, some dried fruit, a self-heating pack of soup that was technically classified as chicken noodle, but contained ingredients I was not confident were either chicken or noodle. She accepted all of it without comment, ate the soup with a careful curiosity. She hadn't had human food before. I could tell. The way you can tell when someone is experiencing a flavor set for the first time, and set the empty container aside with a precision that suggested she found waste offensive. Adequate, she said. High praise. Something crossed her face that might have been amusement. Controlled, brief, like a light turned on in a room and then off again. But there. I checked her wound. The packing had held. The bleeding had stopped. She was healing. Vrathy physiology ran somewhat faster in repair than human physiology. One of the things I'd picked up in training. But she still needed rest. Still needed to keep the wound closed. You need to stay still for another day, I said. I am aware. Just making sure you know I know that you know. The light in the room look again. You are strange, called her Voss. People keep telling me that. I brought her the comm unit that evening. Civilian band, short-range encryption, the kind of thing every salvage contractor kept for discreet communication with buyers who didn't want their acquisitions on public record. She took it, examined it with the competence of someone who understood communications technology at a fundamental level, and then looked up at me. Leave me, she said, not unkindly. I will not be long. I stepped outside the storage building and stood in the canyon dark and looked at the stars. The wreck was cold now, 3 kilometers east, and the recovery team had cleared out. Tomorrow they'd file their report, unmanned vessel, equipment failure, no casualties, and the sector authority would forward it up the chain. And somewhere in the Vrathy administrative apparatus, a notation would be made, and that would be that. Or it wouldn't, depending on who was looking. I thought about the engineer. I thought about the relay station. I went back inside. She had finished the communication. She was sitting with the comm unit in her lap, and there was an expression on her face I hadn't seen before, something stripped back, something she hadn't been allowing herself. Not grief. Not quite. Something older than grief and quieter. Are you all right? I asked. A beat. The people I trust are few, she said, and farther away than I had hoped. How long? 3 days, perhaps 4. She looked at the comm unit, then at me. I am imposing on you. You're not. I am. The amber eyes came up to mine. You have no reason to do this. I have the reason I told you. People in trouble, she said. People in trouble. She was quiet for a moment. Then, in my culture, there is no word that maps cleanly onto what you are doing. The closest translation would be something like, one who holds the door. It is an archaic term. It means someone who stays at the threshold, between the safe and the dangerous, and refuses to let the door close on those who are not yet through. That's a good word, I said. It is considered, in most contemporary Vrathy culture, to be a slightly naive concept, she said. The assumption is that the one holding the door eventually learns better. And in older Vrathy culture. She looked at me for a long time. In older Vrathy culture, she said, it was the highest thing you could call someone. Her name was Serevha. She told me on the second day, in the same quiet, direct way she did most things, no preamble, no ceremony, just the fact of it offered across the space between us. Serevha, I repeated. It will do, she said, for a name to give you. I noted the qualifier but didn't push it. She was healing well, moving more freely, the wound closed enough that she could pace the storage building's narrow dimensions without flinching. She was, I had come to realize, the kind of person who was in genuine physical pain when forced to be still. The pacing was controlled. The stillness she'd worn in the first hours was a discipline, not a natural state. Tell me about the frontier, she said, on the second afternoon. I told her. The Corvin border skirmish, the survey work, the relay station. I kept it factual and spare, the way you told stories to someone who would hear the gaps if you tried to fill them with sentiment. She listened without interrupting, which was a rarer gift than most people gave it credit for. When I finished, she asked, "The relay station, you believe it was deliberate?" "The engineer believed it. He's dead. Make of that what you will." "And you?" "I think people in positions of power sometimes find it more convenient to let things collapse than to shore them up. And I think the frontier is a long way from anyone who might ask uncomfortable questions." She absorbed this. "The Vrothai frontier is not so different," she said carefully. "I imagine frontiers are pretty similar across species." "Perhaps." She looked at her hands, four-fingered, the joints more pronounced than human hands, the skin at the knuckles faintly ridged. "I came to Marin's world to conduct an inspection. Unofficial. There have been reports from people I trust of resource extraction being authorized in this sector under falsified permits. Extraction that serves private interests at the expense of the populations who live here." "Human populations," I said. "Among others." She looked up. "This is not officially my jurisdiction. My formal role does not extend to this sector." "But you came anyway." "I came anyway." I thought about that. I thought about someone taking a personal risk to investigate something that was happening to people who weren't her people, in a sector that wasn't her responsibility, with no official backing. "That's why the ship came down," I said. "I believe so. Someone found out you were coming. Someone with access to navigation registries and enough influence to arrange an accident." She said the word the same way I'd said it, with the same flat, contained weight. "You're not safe here," I said, "even hidden." "No." She looked at me with a directness that was, by now, familiar. "But I am less unsafe than I would be anywhere more visible. And I am—" She paused. The pause was the kind that meant she was choosing between two things to say. "I am grateful for the door you are holding," Calder Voss. That evening she asked me about the scar. Not the story I'd told her. She had the outline of it already, the Corvin border skirmish, the relay station, the thermal lance blast. She asked about the scar itself, what it felt like after. "Cold sometimes," I said. "In low temperatures it tightens up, reminds you it's there." "Does it pain you?" "Not anymore. The first year it did, nerve regeneration. You feel things in scars that aren't there, ghost sensations, the tissue relearning its own map. I looked down at it, the way you do when you've stopped seeing something and then someone asks you to see it again. After a while you just stop noticing." "You stopped noticing your own history," she said. "That's one way to put it." "It is an accurate way." She was quiet for a moment. "Vrothai do not scar. Our tissue repair is more complete than yours. When we are wounded, we heal without marking. The body forgets." She paused. "We consider this a medical advantage. I have begun to wonder since meeting you whether we were wrong." I looked at her. "You want a scar?" "I want what scarring represents," she said carefully. "Evidence that something happened, that the body remembered it even when the mind tried to move past it." She looked at her hands again, the four-fingered precision of them, no marks, no records written in flesh. "My people have very little in the way of physical evidence of our history. It is all in records, archives. Documents that can be altered. Documents like falsified extraction permits," I said. "Yes," she said it flat without emphasis, the way you say something that is too large to be emphasized. "Chancellor Vorath has been manipulating administrative records for 11 years. I know this because the people who first brought it to me had copies, physical copies, printed, stored off-network. The kind of evidence that survives because it was made material." She looked at me. "I would not have believed them without the physical copies. Which is—" She stopped. "Embarrassing," I offered. "Uncomfortable," she said, "for someone who is supposed to govern well." "Governing well doesn't mean knowing everything," I said. It means listening to the right people when they tell you things you don't want to hear. She was quiet. You listened, I said. You came out here personally, without official sanction, to investigate. That's not the behavior of someone who doesn't govern well. That's the behavior of someone who takes the job seriously enough to do it badly on purpose. She looked at me for a long moment. Badly on purpose. Outside your jurisdiction, unofficial, on your own time, I shrugged. The people who run things perfectly within their defined authority often aren't the ones who actually fix anything. That is, she seemed to search for a word. That is a very human way of thinking. Maybe. But you did it. Something in her expression, not quite a smile, something more interior than that. I did do it, she said. Yes. We sat in a comfortable silence for a while. The settlement sounds were distant, muffled by the prefab walls, and the storage building had a particular quality at night, the smell of old metal and salvage oil, the occasional creak of thermal expansion, the very specific quiet of a place built for function rather than habitation. I'd spent a lot of nights working in buildings like this one. I didn't mind them. Tell me about the people who brought you the evidence, I said. The ones with the physical copies. She looked at me. Why? Because whoever they are, they took a significant risk. And if Vorith's people are as well positioned as you're suggesting, those people might be in danger right now. She absorbed this. Something shifted in her expression, not alarm but a kind of recalibration. You are correct, she said. I had not another pause. I had been focused on my own position, not theirs. It happens. It should not happen to me. The words were quiet and self-directed. They are three people, a resource management official in the Corvin sector, an environmental survey coordinator who raised the first objection through official channels and was dismissed, and a human settlement representative who contacted my office through a circuitous route 6 months ago. A human, I said. She was the most comprehensive, Sarah said. She had been documenting the extraction sites for 2 years. She understood what she was looking at because she had watched it happen to her community. A pause. Her name is Marin Oduya. I need to ensure she is protected. She knows you came here. She knew someone was coming. She did not know it was me. Sarevha looked at the comm unit I'd given her. I should communicate that she is specifically identified and may need to move. Do it now, I said. Use the encrypted band. She was already reaching for the unit. The Queen, I was learning, moved quickly when she decided to move. The deliberation was real, she thought carefully before committing, but once committed, there was no lag, no second guessing. Decision made was action taken. I looked away and gave her the privacy of it again. When she handed the unit back, something had settled in her face. Done, she said. Good. She did not know who she was contacting when she reached my office. She thought it was a clerk. Something moved through Sarevha's expression. She had documented everything regardless, written it out in exhaustive detail, submitted it into a channel she had no reason to believe led anywhere significant. She paused. She acted as if it mattered without any evidence that it did. That's the kind of person who keeps things from going entirely wrong, I said. They just do the thing because it's the right thing to do, and they don't wait to see if the conditions are optimal. Sarevha looked at me for a moment. You do that, she said. I try. You do it without noticing, she said. That is the more interesting version. I didn't have a good response to that. She didn't seem to expect one. Outside, the night deepened. The canyon cooled. I pulled the spare thermal sheet over my own shoulders and we sat on opposite sides of the storage building's back room, and somewhere in the third hour, Sarevha Alanth Voreth, Queen Empress of the Vratha hegemony, fell asleep against the wall with a quiet control that even unconsciousness couldn't entirely undo. Spine still straight, chin still up, the damaged armor still in place, one hand loose near the comm unit. I sat watch for another hour. Then I slept too. The third day was the day things changed. I'd been careful going to and from the storage building at odd hours, varying my routes, keeping my interactions in the settlement normal. I was good at normal. I had been keeping my head down for 2 years. I was practiced at not being memorable. But on the third day, there was a shuttle in the settlement's landing pad that hadn't been there the day before. 2 Vratha in formal diplomatic dress, asking questions at the administrator's office. I walked past at a distance, took in what I could, and kept walking. I went back to the storage building by the long way around. Sarevha was on her feet when I came in. She'd heard something, better auditory range than mine. I'd learned, another Vrathi trait, and she was standing at the back of the building with that granite stillness, the combat-ready kind. Diplomatic shuttle, I said. 2 Vrathi formal dress. Her jaw set. Which insignia? I described what I'd seen. The color of the collar trim, the pattern on the shoulder panels. Something moved in her face. Chancellor Vorath's office, she said. Friend of yours? The opposite, she looked at me. He is the one who authorized the extraction permits. Then he knows you were coming. And he knows this is where I came down. She assessed me with that steady amber look. They will have been thorough. They will have reviewed the salvage logs, the settlement records. They will find me. Not necessarily, I said. The storage building isn't in the salvage logs. I lease it on a personal contract, not a company one. They'd have to know to look for it. How long before they know to look for it? I thought about it. The administrator, the people who knew I worked out of that building. The chance that someone had seen me coming and going at odd hours. Today, I said, maybe tonight. She nodded. Then I need to leave. Where? The canyon system. There is a secondary ridge approximately 8 kilometers east. If I can reach it, I can signal my people when they arrive. She was already moving, cataloging her situation, planning her next steps. She moved like someone who had been in difficult positions before and expected to be in them again. 8 kilometers is a lot for someone with a lateral wound that's 3 days old, I said. I am aware of that. I'm coming with you. She stopped. She looked at me. You are not, she said. I know this canyon system, I said. I've salvaged in it for 2 years. I know where the cover is, I know which ridgelines are visible from the settlement and which aren't, and I know where the groundwater is if we need to stop. I held her gaze. You don't. Calder. And if you open that wound on the way, I'm the only person in 3 days walking distance who knows enough Vrathi anatomy to do anything useful about it. I picked up my kit. So, East Ridge, 8 kilometers. Let's go. She stood there for a moment, looking at me with an expression I was starting to be able to read. The one where she was running the calculation and not quite arriving at the number she expected. You are genuinely strange, she said. So you keep saying. We left before sunset. I set the pace slower than she would have chosen, fast enough to put meaningful distance between us and the settlement before dark. The canyon system opened eastward into a network of branching ravines, the walls 20 to 30 meters high, the floor soft with gravel and the occasional scrub plant that survived by being almost nothing. Good cover, bad footing in the dark. We moved without talking, the kind of silence that wasn't strained. An hour in, I called a halt at a sheltered bend and checked her wound under the light of my handheld. The binding had held. No fresh bleeding. Good, I said. I told you I was fine. You tell me you're fine every time I ask. I've stopped using that as a data point. She made a sound. It took me a moment to identify it as a suppressed laugh. We kept moving. 2 hours in, on a ledge above a dry channel, she stumbled not badly, caught herself almost immediately, but I was close enough to see it. I took her arm. She let me. We walked the next kilometer with my hand under her elbow, steadying, not directing. She didn't comment on it. I didn't either. The stars over the canyon were extraordinary. Marin's world sat at the edge of a dense stellar field, and on clear nights the sky was thick with them, the light enough to see by if you were patient. I'd learned to navigate by them out here. Habit. You know the stars, she said, following my upward look. You pick it up. Name one. I pointed. That one humans call it the Carver. There's a human story about it, an old one from before we got to space, about a craftsman who stayed at his work so long his wife thought he'd forgotten her, and when he died they put his tools in the sky to remember him by. I paused. Not a good story, actually. The craftsman was a fool, but the star is nice. Silence for a moment. In Vroth-I navigational tradition, Serapha said, that cluster is called the Watcher, the one who sees but does not intervene. Another pause. We are not, as a people, great admirers of intervention. And yet, I said. She glanced at me, and yet, she agreed. 3.5 hours in, we stopped again. Not because she needed to, she would not have admitted to needing to, but because I called the halt and she didn't argue, which was the same thing. The ledge we stopped on was wider than the one before, and from it you could see a long stretch of the canyon system to the south, the walls pale gold and gray in the starlight, the floor below a dark thread. Beautiful, in the way that things are beautiful when you're tired and there's no one around to perform appreciation for. Tell me about the court, I said, the one that considers the prophecy a poetic artifact. She looked at me sideways. Why? Because I'm going to be working for you, apparently, and it seems useful to know what I'm working adjacent to. A moment of consideration. The Vroth-I court is approximately 260 individuals, including ministers, advisors, heads of major administrative branches, and the Sovereign Council. She paused. The Sovereign Council is 9 members. Of those 9, 4 are genuinely loyal to the line. 2 are Vorith's people, which I have known for some time. The remaining 3 are, she searched for a word, navigational. They follow the current. Loyal to whoever holds power most securely. So your position is stronger than Vorith's as long as you're alive and visible, I said. Precisely, which is why making me disappear was more useful to him than any public opposition. How long has he been running the permit fraud? 11 years, as I said, but his opposition to me is older than that. He served my father's court as well. She stopped. Her jaw tightened briefly. My father trusted him, elevated him. Vorith was competent enough that the trust seemed rational. Your father's dead, I said. It wasn't a question. 8 years ago. Illness, genuine illness. I have had it investigated independently 3 times. The timing was convenient for Vorith, but I cannot attribute it to him. She paused. I have had to make my peace with that uncertainty. That's a hard thing to make peace with. Yes. We were quiet for a moment. The canyon stretched south, silent and pale. I was 19, she said, when I came to the throne, the youngest sovereign of my line in 4 centuries. Another pause. There was a contingent who believed I would not be adequate, who counseled a regency period, additional oversight, managed decision-making until I was older. Vorith was prominent among them. But you weren't managed. I was not. The flatness in her voice on those 3 words was the most clearly satisfied I'd heard her. I spent the first 2 years being very careful and very thorough and very correct in all the formal ways, and I spent the 3rd year beginning to understand which of my advisors were actually working for the hegemony and which were working for themselves. And after that, she considered. After that, I was harder to manage. And Vorith pivoted to other methods. Gradually, it is 11 years of gradual, she looked at the canyon. I have been watching him the entire time, gathering. Waiting for enough evidence to act without triggering a constitutional crisis. Removing a chancellor without cause would destabilize the court in ways that would serve no one, least of all the people the court exists to serve. And now you have the cause. Now I have the cause, the evidence, and 3 independent witnesses who will testify. A pause. And I have the fact that he tried to kill me, which tends to clarify the legal position considerably. I imagine it does. She glanced at me. You do not find this alarming. Court politics, assassination attempts, 11-year institutional corruption. I spent 7 years on the frontier, I said. I have a reasonably high baseline for alarming. The relay station. Among other things. She was quiet for a moment. We were climbing again, the ridge ahead of us, the last kilometer. What happened after, she asked. After the relay station, after you left the Corps? Contracts, I said. Survey work salvage, the kind of jobs that need someone who knows how to work in bad conditions and doesn't mind moving around. And Marin's World. I came here 2 years ago on a 6-month salvage contract, and the contract kept extending, and at some point I stopped planning to leave. I paused. I'm not sure it's the life I expected, but it's the one I have, and I thought about it. I don't find myself wanting a different one very often. You are content, she said, or close to it. Close to it, I agreed, or I was. The parameters seemed to have changed somewhat recently. Something moved in her expression again, the controlled, interior kind of something. I am sorry, she said, for the disruption. Don't be, I meant it. It's the most interesting week I've had in 2 years. A low bar. A comfortable bar. I was comfortable. I paused. And now I'm not, and I find I don't mind that either. She looked at me. Amber eyes, canyon dark, the stars overhead. What do you want? She asked. It was a direct question, the way all her questions were direct, but this one had more weight behind it, more actual interest in the answer. I thought about it. I thought about the carver, the fool, and his tools. I thought about the engineer, the relay station, the long years of careful, useful work that had led nowhere in particular. I want to do work that matters, I said. I want to do it somewhere big enough that it needs doing, and I stopped. Go on, she said. I want to not be the person who knows about the relay station and doesn't have the leverage to do anything about it, I said. I've been that person. I don't like it. She was quiet for a moment. The role I am offering, she said, it would give you leverage. Yes. And access to situations that matter. Yes. And the size of the work, she glanced at the sky. The Vrothai hegemony spans 43 systems. The frontier regions alone contain 60-something inhabited worlds with resource management issues, not unlike what is happening in this sector. I know. You would not be comfortable, she said, not in the way you have been comfortable. No. She looked at me for a long time. Good, she said. And then she turned and began climbing the last stretch of ridge, and I followed her, and I was smiling at the back of her head in the dark, and she couldn't see it, which was probably for the best. We reached the secondary ridge at just past the 3rd hour. It was higher than I'd expected from memory. I'd been out here in daylight once, maybe a year ago, a shelf of rock above the canyon floor, sheltered on 3 sides by natural walls that had been shaped by old water action into something almost deliberate. Sarevha looked at it with the eye of someone assessing cover. This will do, she said. I helped her up the last few meters of scrambled ascent, and she settled against the rock wall with a controlled relief that she wouldn't have let me see 2 days ago. I set up the thermal sheet small, the heat-reflective kind that collapsed to nothing in a pack, and sat down across from her. She was looking at me. There was something different in the look. Not the assessment of a patient evaluating a medic, not the sharp tactical gaze she'd worn in the storage building. Something more careful, something more inward. Take off your jacket, she said. I blinked. Excuse me. Your jacket, she held my gaze. There is something I need to see. I was wearing a thermal layer under it, cold enough on the ridge to need it, but I took off the jacket. The thermal layer had a collar, but it was low enough that the scar showed. The diagonal burn from collarbone to sternum. She went very still. It was the most still I had seen her, stiller than the first night on the wreck floor, stiller than the granite discipline of her pain. This was a different kind of still. The kind that happens when the world rearranges itself, and the body hasn't caught up yet. Her lips parted. The words came out barely audible, rough at the edges, like something she'd never actually expected to say. "It can't be you." The canyon was silent. The stars burned overhead. The night wind moved through the rock with a sound like breathing. "What?" I said. She closed her eyes, opened them. The amber was brighter than I'd ever seen it, or maybe that was just the starlight. "In Vrathai historical record," she said, and her voice had changed. It was still careful, still controlled, but something underneath it had come loose, something she was holding with both hands now. "There is a chronicle, very old. From the period of the first reach, when Vrathai explorers first mapped the outer stellar regions." She paused. "There is a passage in that chronicle about a species the scouts encountered. Bilateral, bipedal, physiologically similar to Vrathai, but softer in build and extraordinarily varied in coloring. The scouts called them the warm ones." "Humans," I said. "They didn't know that then, but yes." She looked at the scar. "The chronicle contains a prophecy. An older word for it would be covenant or promise, from a Vrathai seer of the first reach period. It describes a human who would one day hold the door for a Vrathai of the blood sovereign line in a time of danger without knowing what he was doing, and the sign that would identify him." Her eyes came up to mine. "A mark. A burn diagonal from the shoulder to the center of the chest, left side." The canyon was very quiet. "That's," I started. "I know." Her voice was steady, but underneath it something enormous was moving, like the ground shifting. "I have known the prophecy since I was a child. It is part of the sovereign line's history. It is considered by most of my court to be a poetic artifact, a metaphor." She looked at the scar again. "I thought so too." "And now?" She looked at me. Amber eyes, starlight, the canyon walls around us, the distant sound of wind. "You came to a wrecked ship in the dark," she said. "You treated my wound without asking my name. You hid me from people who would have used me. You fed me from your own stores. You walked 8 kilometers in the dark to make sure I reached safety. And you have a burned scar, diagonal left side, shoulder to sternum, that matches a description written down 1400 years ago." She paused. "I am a pragmatic woman," called her Vas. "I do not invest easily in the symbolic, but I am also not a fool." I sat there for a moment. "What does the prophecy say happens after?" I asked. "After the human holds the door?" Something changed in her expression. A door of her own, opening somewhere. "It says," she said slowly, "that the sovereign line will not fall, that those who sought to bring it down will be exposed and undone, that the one who held the door will be—" She stopped. "Will be what?" She looked at me with an expression I had no name for. "Honored," she said, "in a way appropriate to one who has preserved the line." "That's vague." 1400-year-old prophecy. "Fair point." We sat in a silence that was different from all the other silences of the past 3 days. Fuller, like a room that had just been occupied when a moment ago it was empty. "Sarevha," I said, "is that your full name?" She looked at me for a long moment. "No," she said, "it is not." "What's the rest of it?" Another long moment, then. "Sarevha Alanth Vorath," she said, "first of the sovereign line, Queen Empress of the Vrathai hegemony." I sat with that. "Okay," I said. "Okay," she repeated, with a tone that suggested she had not expected that response. "I mean okay as in that explains some things, the armor, the manner." "The thing with the Chancellor," I paused. "The fact that you told me your name was just a name you'd give me. I could not be certain of you." You're still not certain of me. I am more certain than I was. She looked at the scar one more time, then at my face. You really did not know. I really did not know. You helped me because of who I was to you, a person in trouble. That's generally the threshold I use. She was quiet. Then, with a precision that I was beginning to understand, was the Vrathi version of emotion made audible. I have sat on a throne since I was 19 years old, called Vas. I have been served, advised, protected, deferred to, maneuvered, flattered, and managed by thousands of people over the years. Not one of them, not one, has ever simply treated me as a person who needed help. The canyon was very still. Well, I said, you did need help. I did, she said, and then quietly, I still do. Her people arrived on the 4th day. 2 ships, small and fast, coming in low over the ridge at dawn. They were aboard before I'd fully registered what was happening, 6 Vrathi in the kind of armor that meant security, not ceremony. And then a 7th older, who moved through them with the ease of someone accustomed to being obeyed, and went straight to Serevha. They spoke in Vrathi, fast and low. I caught none of it. I stood back and gave them space. After a few minutes, the older one, an advisor, I thought, from the way Serevha deferred to him in small ways while clearly still making every decision, looked at me. You are called Vas, he said, in accented but clear standard. I am. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he inclined his head just slightly, an old gesture, I thought, formal, the kind that had a specific meaning. Serevha came to me. She was standing straight now, the wound something she'd filed away, the queen back in her posture and her bearing. But something had stayed from the 3 nights in the canyon. Something had been redistributed. Chancellor Vorith is being arrested, she said. My people had already begun the investigation before I arrived here. I had given them what to look for. The permits. The extraction sites, the falsified authorizations. She paused. The human settlements in this sector will be protected. Good, I said. The crew of my vessel, something moved in her face, will be honored. I have given the order. Good, I said again more quietly. She stood before me and the morning light was coming over the canyon wall, and it caught the silver patterning of her armor, the white of her hair, the amber of her eyes. The prophecy, she said, does not specify how the honoring is to be done. It leaves that to the sovereign's discretion. Okay, I said. I would like to use my discretion, she said. I waited. You are a field medic with frontier experience, fluency in multiple non-human physiological frameworks, and a demonstrated capacity for independent action and good judgment, she said. These are not common qualities. Thank you. I am forming an office, she said. A new role, an inspector for human Vrathi border sectors reporting directly to the throne, with authority to investigate resource authorization, permit fraud, and she paused, and something that wasn't quite a smile but was something in that neighborhood crossed her face. Accidents. I looked at her. You're offering me a job, I said. I am. Working for you. Adjacent to me, she said. The role is independent. You would report to me, but you would not require my authorization for investigations. You would have full access to Vrathi administrative records in the relevant sectors. That's a significant position. Yes. You've known me for 4 days. 3 days and most of a 4th, she said, and the prophecy knew you for 1400 years. Something moved in her face. I am pragmatic. I have said this. But I have also just survived an assassination attempt by relying on a human stranger's instinctive goodness, and I have sat in a canyon and watched that human point out constellations and give me very poor quality soup and hold a door open that he didn't even know existed. She looked at me directly. I am not willing to let that walk away. I stood there in the morning light in the canyon on a planet I'd come to because I had nowhere else to be, with a field medic's kit on my shoulder, and a 4-day growth of beard, and a scar I'd stopped seeing so long ago I'd forgotten it was there. I thought about the engineer. I thought about the relay station. I thought about frontiers. The soup wasn't that bad, I said. It was, she said. It was very bad. Chicken noodle. It was neither chicken nor noodle. I looked at her, she looked at me. All right, I said, I'll take the job. The shuttle was a different kind of silence from the canyon. In the canyon, silence was made of distance, the long blank of rock and air between us and everything else, the specific emptiness of a place where no one else was. On the shuttle, silence was made of containment, the security detail forward murmuring among themselves, the advisor on his data panel, efficient and absorbed. Sarevha, 2 seats across from me, already in something that looked like a working posture, back straight, jaw set, the queen fully reinstalled behind her eyes. Someone had brought fresh formal clothing, folded, waiting, and she had changed out of the damaged armor into a simpler but still precisely calibrated version of herself. The white hair was rebraided, close and controlled. She looked like someone who had never spent 3 nights in a canyon, eating reconstituted protein bars. Except that she had, and I had been there, and that was a fact that existed between us now in a way I was still figuring out the dimensions of. I sat with my medic's kit in my lap and looked out the viewport as the atmosphere thinned, and the planet's surface became a brown and cream abstract below us. The canyon system, the settlement, the gravel flat where the wreck had burned, all of it shrinking to nothing. I thought about the job, Inspector for Human Vratha Border Sectors, reporting directly to the throne. I was reasonably certain I didn't know enough about the Vratha administrative system to understand the full scope of what that meant. I was reasonably certain that not knowing enough had never previously stopped me from taking on a situation. I thought about Marin Oduya and her 2 years of documentation, submitted into a channel she had no reason to believe went anywhere. I thought about what it would mean to be the channel that it went to. I thought about the relay station engineer. The shuttle climbed. Gravity settled differently, the planet's pull lightening as we left the atmosphere. The stars ahead of us clarified the dense stellar field of the Corvin Reach, the same stars I'd been looking at from the canyon floor the night before, now from the other direction. We were 3 hours out, the shuttle rising through Marin's world's upper atmosphere, the canyon system already small and brown below us, when Sarevha came and sat across from me. The security detail was at the front of the cabin. The advisor was reviewing something on a data panel. We had a pocket of privacy. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Show me the star you were telling me about when we clear the atmosphere." The carver. The fool who forgot his wife. He didn't forget her, I said. He just got absorbed. In your telling, that is not an exoneration. No, I admitted, it's not. She looked at the viewport. The sky was deepening from blue to dark, the stars beginning to appear. What happened to the wife? She asked. The story doesn't say. That seems like an omission. It's a very old story. Still, she looked back at me. In 1400 years, when someone tells the story of Calder Voss and the canyon on Marin's world, I would prefer they not omit the relevant parties. I looked at her. What story would that be? I said. She held my gaze for a long moment. One about someone who held a door, she said, and what it cost him and what it was worth. She paused. And about the person who walked through it and did not forget. The stars were fully out now. I found the cluster I'd pointed to in the canyon, the Carver, the Watcher, 2 names for the same configuration of ancient light. There, I said and pointed. She leaned forward slightly to follow the line of my arm, and her shoulder was a centimeter from mine, and the scar on my chest pulled faintly with the motion, the way it always did in cold air, and I thought about all the things that had led to that particular mark being in that particular place. The relay station, the engineer, the blast, the years of carrying it. And I thought about 1400-year-old prophecies and pragmatic queens and soup that was neither chicken nor noodle. I thought maybe some scars aren't a record of damage. Maybe some of them are an address. I see it, she said. 2 names, I said, 1 star. She was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. That is often how it goes. We stayed like that for a while, her leaning toward the viewport, me half-turned to point out the cluster, the shuttle carrying us silently upward and outward. Below, the planet had become a small thing, a brown and ochre disk with a white smear of cloud across one hemisphere, the canyon system invisible now, the wreck site invisible, the storage building and the gravel flat and the settlement with its 400 people trying to get somewhere better. All of it too small to see. The stars, by contrast, kept getting bigger. There will be, Serevha began and then stopped, started again. When we reach the capital, there will be a period of considerable difficulty. Vorith's removal will be contested by his allies in the council. The investigation will be scrutinized. There will be those who suggest I fabricated the evidence, that the permits were legitimate, that the assassination attempt was staged. She was looking out the viewport still, but her voice had come down a register, into something that was speaking to me rather than past me. I have been through difficult periods before. I know how to manage them. I know you do, I said. She looked at me. Something in her expression asked how I could know that, having known her 4 days. Because you've been managing Vorith for 11 years without letting him know you were doing it, I said. You came out to this sector with no official backing and no support structure on a personal conviction that something was wrong. You survived a crash and 3 days in a canyon with a lateral wound, and you told me you were fine every time I asked. I paused. You're going to be all right. She held my gaze for a long moment. You say that with unusual confidence, she said. I have a reasonably good track record of assessing whether people are going to be all right. And those who are not. I've lost people, I said, flat and honest. I know the difference. She was quiet. The shuttle hummed. The stars continued their steady indifference outside the viewport. Marin Oduya will be given a formal protective status and relocated to the capital, Serevha said. She has more than earned it. The resource management official and the environmental coordinator will receive formal recognition. She paused. This will not be without risk to them. Being publicly associated with a successful prosecution of a chancellor has a complicated social valence in Vrothai politics. But it needs doing. It needs doing, she agreed. Then do it, I said. And if people in your court object, they're probably people who needed to object for their own reasons. The ghost of a smile again, more present this time. Less like a light turned on and off and more like a light that had been left on and was only now visible because the surrounding room had gotten darker. I am going to find it very strange, she said, having someone in my extended staff who speaks to me like this. Like what? Like I am a person who is capable of being wrong, who might benefit from a direct statement of what appears obvious to someone outside the room. She paused. It is not, she seemed to search for the right word. It is not unwelcome, but it will require adjustment. I'll try to be annoying at regular intervals, I said. Give you something consistent to adjust to. The smile again, more of it this time. That, she said, I believe entirely. The shuttle climbed. The planet fell away below. The stars opened up ahead of us, thick and bright and indifferent and entirely full of doors that someone, somewhere, was holding open. I settled into my seat. I had work to do.